This is Aries Stories. Stories for the hours when the world goes quiet, for the ones who listen after the lights go out. Tonight's story is called The Librarian of Shadows. There are places the map forgets, not because they are far away, but because they are not meant to be found twice. I was traveling through the countryside last autumn, a long road with fewer and fewer streetlights, the kind of drive that makes the world feel like it's being erased behind you. A thin rain followed me from town to town, and when the gas gauge fell just below empty, I pulled into a village I'd never heard of. The buildings were close together, all washed out colors and small windows that reflected nothing. The main street was empty, except for a dim cafe sign blinking open, and farther down, a low concrete building with a flickering light over the door. It was almost midnight when I saw the sign. The letters were half burned out, but I could still read them. Public library. It felt impossible. Who would keep a library open at that hour? But the rain was falling harder, and the soft hum from inside sounded like shelter. I pushed the door open and stepped into a different kind of quiet. The light inside was the color of old paper. Fluorescent tubes buzzed somewhere above, their hum filling the space like a heartbeat just behind the walls. Rows of shelves stretched ahead, their edges lost in shadow. The air smelled faintly of dust and something metallic, like rainwater on coin. There was no front desk, no sound of turning pages, just the faint tick of a clock that I couldn't see. I told myself someone had to be here. Places don't stay lit on their own. But as I stepped further in, the door eased shut behind me with a sound softer than a sigh. I walked the aisles, reading the faded labels taped to each shelf. Local history, reference, personal accounts. Each section was crowded with unmarked spines, gray, black, and pale blue. No titles, no author names. When I pulled one out at random, it was heavier than I expected. The cover was blank, except for a small, embossed symbol. A single eye, half closed. Inside, the pages were filled with neat, careful handwriting. Every line was a memory, someone's life, written in the first person. But the more I read, the more familiar the words began to sound. There was a mention of a long road, a thin rain, a gas gauge falling just below empty. I closed the book, and the air seemed to shift, as though the building itself had just taken a breath. That was when I noticed the figure standing near the far end of the aisle. The figure didn't move when I saw them. They stood perfectly still at the edge of the light, where the shadows folded against the wall. For a moment, I thought it might be a coat rack or a trick of reflection, but as my eyes adjusted, I saw the faint rise and fall of breath. They wore what looked like a gray librarian's uniform, old-fashioned, pressed but a little frayed. Their head was bowed, hands resting on a cart filled with books that had no titles. "Sorry," I said, or maybe only thought I did. The sound seemed to die before it reached them. The figure turned, just slightly, enough that I could see the glint of their glasses. Behind the lenses, there was no reflection, only darkness. They raised one hand slowly and pointed deeper into the library. I don't know why I followed. Maybe because the silence in that place felt heavier than refusal. The aisle led to a low reading room. There were lamps on every table, each one flickering as though unsure whether to stay lit. The librarian moved ahead of me, soundless, calm, pushing the cart that squealed once and then fell silent again. On one of the tables lay a single open book. The pages trembled in the air, though there was no breeze. I stepped closer and saw that it was the same handwriting as before, the same careful script, but this time the entry was dated for tomorrow. The date written on the open page hadn't come yet. I stared at it until the letters blurred. Outside, the wind pressed against the windows with a hollow sound, and the light above the desk began to hum. A low vibration that grew and grew until the air itself seemed to flicker. When I looked up again, the librarian was standing at the far end of the room. Their face was turned toward me now, but the features were indistinct, like a photograph that had been handled too many times. In their hands, they held a pen, and the tip hovered over a blank page. The hum settled into the sound of a pencil scratching. I took a step forward. The librarian wrote something and then paused, waiting. When I leaned close enough to see the page, I found my own name written there, followed by a line I hadn't spoken yet. I backed away. The shelves seemed to draw closer, the rows deepening as though the building were breathing in. Somewhere in the distance, a clock began to strike, each chime landing a little slower than the one before. I tried to find the door, but every aisle looked the same now, each one bending slightly where the lights flickered. Every book I passed whispered faintly as I moved by, the sound of paper turning itself. And then I saw it, a shelf that hadn't been there before. On it rested a single spine, newer than the others, still free of dust. I didn't want to touch it, but my hand lifted on its own. Inside, the first page was blank except for the title, The Librarian of Shadows. Below it, the handwriting was mine. I don't remember sitting down or the way the pen felt when it found my fingers. Only the sound of writing, steady and quiet, the feeling that someone else was guiding the words through me. Somewhere behind me, footsteps stopped. The light dimmed, and I understood the pattern at last. The librarian was never one person. They were whoever had stayed too long, whoever had read until the pages began to read them back. Now, when the clock ticks past midnight and the rain finds the windows, I hear the door open at the far end of the hall. Someone always comes in, looking for shelter. I close my notebook, stand, and wait among the shelves. This was Aries Stories. Thank you for listening and for letting the night linger a little longer. If the lights flicker while you dream, it's probably nothing. Just the sound of a story finding its next reader.